Hi everyone, I'm going to be reading another book to you this week. The Animal That Made Scientists Wonder. Nature sometimes baffles scientists with creatures that don't seem to be possible. The platypus of Australia was one such case. Scientists wondered if this bizarre creature was real or just a duck-billed furry hoax. The Peculiar Platypus by Cynthia Clampett. Australia, a place like no other. Over 200 years ago, British settlers began arriving in Australia, an unknown land 10,000 miles from their home. Once they looked around, they discovered some big surprises. Australia is south of the equator, so the weather seemed upside down and backwards to the British. The seasons were reversed, with winter in July and summer in January. Even the trees seemed odd. Many trees kept their leaves all year and shed their bark instead. But the Australian animals were the strangest of all. Most settlers had never seen animals that carried their young in pouches on their stomachs. They had never seen animals move like kangaroos, which did not run or walk, but bounced along big feet. But the strangest creature of all was yet to be discovered. In 1797, a settler came across a remarkable animal at the edge of a lake. It had soft fur and was about the size of a rabbit. It also had a large bill and webbed feet like a duck, and under the webbed feet were claws. What was this peculiar creature? The settler had stumbled upon a mystery. A faraway land. Australia is unusual in many ways. Almost half of its birds are found nowhere else. Most of its fish are found only in Australian waters. More than 80% of its plants, reptiles, and mammals live only in Australia. Why are the living things in Australia so unusual? The reason is that Australia is far from most other land. It is an island continent, cut off from other continents, so its plants and animals developed separately from living things in other parts of the world. Many of Australia's mammals, like this kangaroo, carry their young in pouches. Is this a real animal? There were no scientists in Australia at that time. So when settlers found new plants and animals, they sent examples back to Great Britain to be studied and identified by scientists there. That is why some settlers took one of the mysterious duck-billed creatures that had died and stuffed it and dried it. Then they sent it to the famous British Museum in London, England. At the British Museum, George Shaw was the first scientist to examine and write about this unfamiliar creature. He also gave it a name, platypus, from a Greek word that means flat-footed. Shaw described the platypus's unusual features in great detail, but he did not know if he could trust his own eyes. How could any animal be this strange? It is impossible not to entertain or have some doubts as to the genuine nature of the animal, Shaw noted. In other words, Shaw wondered if the animal was a fake or a hoax. He had a good reason to be worried. Scientists had trouble believing a furry animal could have a duck's bill and webbed feet. A hoax is a trick or joke that fools people, sometimes even scientists, into believing something is real when it's not. In Shaw's day, dishonest traders sewed real fish tails onto monkeys' bodies to convince people that these creations were mermaids. Some people believed these mermaids were real, and they paid a lot of money to buy them. Shaw wanted to make sure he was not writing about a fake animal, so he used a pair of scissors to cut and carefully examine the edge of the platypus's bill. He was looking for stitches. He wanted to make sure someone hadn't sewn a duck's bill into the furry body of another animal. Since Shaw was unsure that the stuffed platypus was not a hoax, he declared the discovery of a new species. But other scientists still had doubts. They needed to see a living platypus before they believed it really existed. This is the platypus George Shaw examined. Hard to believe, but real. Because the platypus is very shy and hunts at night, settlers in Australia had a hard time finding them. Over time, though, they had more chances to watch the platypus and to observe how it lived. When scientists who came to Australia finally had the chance to examine living, breathing platypuses, they were forced to accept the animal as a new species. Scientists also decided that even though it had a beak like a duck, the platypus was a mammal. But unlike many mammals in Australia, it did not have a pouch. Is it a mammal? Scientists at the time believed a mammal had to have hair, have a backbone, give birth to live young, not eggs, feed its babies milk. In 1864, settlers in Australia began making new claims about the platypus that seemed impossible, even for this surprising creature. They claimed to have seen a platypus lay 2 eggs. This was big news because scientists had said that the platypus was a mammal, and mammals did not lay eggs. Birds and reptiles, like snakes and lizards, lay eggs. Some scientists believe the stories about the 2 eggs, but most scientists argued against the idea that a platypus laid eggs. Finally, in 1884, British scientist William Hay Caldwell came to Australia to settle the argument. He spent months camped near a river where platypus lived, studying them closely. Then, after nearly 5 months of research, Caldwell sent a telegram to other scientists confirming the surprising fact. The platypus laid eggs. Caldwell's news about the platypus laying eggs shocked scientists around the world. But that was not the end of the story. Scientists learned that once platypus babies hatch, the mother feeds her babies milk, like other mammals. But how she does it is different. The platypus has pores on her stomach that sweat or leak milk, and the babies just lick the milk off of her. These platypus eggs are leathery like snakes. A mother platypus snuggles with her babies. A class of its own. Scientists fit plants and animals into classes or groups. Many mammals in Australia are marsupials, a class of mammals with pouches. But the platypus didn't fit into the marsupial class. It was a mammal, but it didn't have a pouch. Scientists had a class for every living thing, but they didn't have one for the platypus, so they made one up. In 1835, scientists created a new class for the platypus, monotreme. A monotreme is an egg-laying mammal. While there are a lot of marsupials, about 250 different types, monotremes are pretty rare. In fact, there are only 2 monotremes that scientists know about today: the platypus and the echidna mammals. Marsupials have pouches for babies. Monotremes lay eggs. The platypus is not alone. In time, people learned that the platypus was not the only monotreme. Australia is home to one of the surprising egg-laying mammal, the echidna. Instead of a duckbill and webbed feet, This animal has a long, thin beak and a body covered with spines. The echidna is also called a spiny anteater. It does eat ants, but it also eats termites and other insects. It pulls these bugs into its tiny mouth with a long tongue that looks like a worm. The echidna is a monotreme. Life as a platypus. Platypuses live near rivers and streams in eastern Australia. The platypus is perfectly designed for the life it leads, which includes spending a lot of time underwater. In addition to webbed feet that help it swim, it has a tail that is like a paddle. A smooth shape of the platypus helps it move easily through the water. When the platypus is underwater, it closes its nose, ears, and eyes. It doesn't need to see in order to hunt. Its leathery bill has sensors that are so sensitive they can pick up the tiny electrical signals made by other animals as they move. This makes it possible for the platypus to find the underwater creatures that it eats, like worms, shrimp, and crayfish. Once the platypus finds food, it heads for the surface. The platypus doesn't have teeth, so it crushes and grinds its food on tough pads inside its bill. Home of the platypus. The platypus makes its home in wetland areas in the eastern part of Australia, shown in green on the map. One more unusual and scary feature. A platypus comes from an egg, like a reptile, and it is like a reptile in another way. The male platypus is poisonous, just like many snakes, but it doesn't have a deadly bite. Instead, it has sharp, bony spurs or spikes on its back feet, and the spurs are full of poison. A platypus spur delivers enough poison to kill a dog. If a platypus kicks a person with its spur, the person won't die, but will be in a terrible pain for weeks. Some people have said the injury feels like being stung by hundreds of bees at the same time. Platypus spur. Spur, claw, poison duct, poison gland. A place in history. It has been more than 200 years since the scientist George Shaw examined and named the platypus that had been sent to him in London, England. That famous platypus has been moved to London's Natural History Museum, but if you went there, you would not be able to see it. The museum keeps this platypus in a sealed box in a special cupboard to protect it because it is so important to the history of science. If you could visit it, you would be able to see the cut marks that George Shaw made on the bill to check if the animal was a hoax. The features that make the platypus so unusual and almost unbelievable are the very features that make it so interesting. The platypus is unique, but it is a real one-of-a-kind animal from a one-of-a-kind land. The glossary. Genuine. Real, not fake or pretend. Hoax, something created to trick or fool people. Mammal, a warm-blooded animal and with a backbone and hair that feeds its young milk. Marsupial, a mammal that raises its young in a pouch on its stomach. Monotreme, an egg-laying mammal. Pore, a tiny opening such as in the skin. Reptile, a cold-blooded animal with a backbone and scales. Lizards and snakes are reptiles. Settler, one of the first people to move to and live in a new region. Species, a class or group of plants or animals whose members have common qualities. The platypus, a living museum. Many scientists view the platypus as an ongoing puzzle, one that has surprised and confused them for centuries. Part duck, part beaver, or part snake. It took scientists years to classify the platypus as a mammal. Today, scientists are learning new and surprising information about this seemingly mixed up animal by mapping its genes. Genes determine specific traits like the color of a person's eyes or the length of an animal's tail. After the map of human genes was completed, the platypus was one of the other mammals to be mapped. The platypus shares traits with reptiles and birds. Scientists believe that the genes for those traits have remained unchanged in platypus for millions of years. By studying platypus genes, scientists hope to learn how genes operate in other mammals, including humans. Wow, that was a good book. It was really interesting to learn about the peculiar platypus. So on page 2, so I'm going to show you page 2, this is where the author introduced the word peculiar for the first time while reading the book. By using your context clues, I want you to write down or tell somebody in your family, what do you think peculiar means? Then, after you have written down or talked to someone in your family about the word peculiar, I want you to get out your dictionary. Now, everybody got one of these in 3rd grade. I want you to get out your dictionary and I want you to find the word peculiar and see if what you think the word means is the same as what it says in the dictionary. Our next question is about page 14. So we're going to go to page 14. And I want you to tell me, why do you think the spur is important to the platypus? So you can write down your answer. I think the spur is important to the platypus because, or you can turn and talk to someone in your house. And the last question I have for you is I just want you to talk about 2 things that you learned, 2 facts about the platypus, and tell me what you thought was interesting about them. So write them down or tell somebody in your house 2 interesting facts that you learned today. I really hope that everyone is staying safe and you're staying home and staying healthy. I miss you so much and I can't wait to see you when we get back to school. Bye!